Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. My name is Kevin Rafuse. Joining me usually is my co-host, Justin Cousart. Justin is still off getting married and on his honeymoon. He honestly hasn't been on social media in a couple days, so normally that would be like my distress signal to figure out if Justin is okay. But as we talked about in the episode 2 weeks ago, Justin's in Cancun with his now wife, and she probably is not going to be too thrilled if he's tweeting on the honeymoon. So if y'all want to blow him up, by all means do it. Tweet him at Justin on the air, Justin C on the air, excuse me, and wish him a good honeymoon and all that fun stuff. In the meantime, though, joining me, my good friend Ryan Mayer. Follow him on Twitter at @R_Mayer. Ryan works for CBS Local Sports. He also does some sports updating and anchoring for Fox News Headlines, covering the NBA, all sorts of other sports out there. Ryan and I go way back. If you're a super Drive and Dish NBA podcast fan, I mean, Ryan was one of our first guests. I'm talking way back, like 8 years ago. You were working in ESPN Marquette at the time. I think we talked some Bucks. Man, the Upper Peninsula. You're in New York now, so I it's cold there, but there's nothing like that. That was the coldest episode maybe ever of the podcast.
I mean, without question, I'd probably at the very least the closest to Canada maybe that this podcast got in terms of guests on the show, to say the least. But yeah, it was a while back. It was interesting because I was reflecting on that today. And we were talking about Giannis right as Giannis was starting to take off. Like it was the year or two after he got drafted, and we were just starting to see what now has become the full-fledged, just two-time MVP, Greek freak, everything that he's become since. It's kind of wild to reflect on.
It was back when everyone was just super excited if you could nail the name at that point. Like, I remember the first time I knew how to pronounce Giannis. Like, I said it at least for 5 or 6 episodes straight just because I was so proud of myself of finally having it down. And, I mean, yeah, you want to talk about, you pull some clips from that episode. It's like, yeah, well, the potential's there. I mean, if he ever figures this out, look out. I think he figured it out.
Yeah, he figured it out.
Pretty darn good.
He figured that out. Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, two-time MVP, and we've seen what he's done continuing into this year. And I mean, yeah, figured it out, to say the least.
Yeah, and honestly, maybe a little voter fatigue. I mean, I don't think he'd be the MVP this year, but I mean, he's certainly in that conversation, probably more so than we give him credit for. We're going to talk a little Bucks later on. We're going to talk about the Eastern Conference a lot on this episode as well, kind of the continued race for the number 1 seed and how this playoff picture is looking to shake up a little bit as well. Of course, we're going to talk some surging Eastern Conference teams. Ryan's in New York, so of course we got to talk some Knicks, give them some praise. I know there are a lot of Knicks fans who know me as the resident Knicks hater. We got a lot of good things to say, so you're going to want to stay tuned for that because your squad is really fun. I can't deny it anymore. Of course, the Washington Wizards surging as well. Russ going crazy. So we'll get into that a little bit as well. Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. We will read them on the podcast. If you're not an Apple user, you can follow us anywhere that there are podcasts: Stitcher, Google Play Store, Amazon Music, Spreaker, Player FM, TuneIn. You name a podcast place, we are there. Of course, whether you're driving into work, whatever you may be doing, listening at work, don't worry, we won't tell your boss. It's all right. Subscribe to the new Drive and Dish NBA podcast channel on YouTube. Watch the version there. You can see Ryan and I chatting from our respective home studios, and get all our other goodies there as well. All our other past episodes, a couple of things that Justin and I are working on as well. But now a word from our sponsors. All right, so let's just get right into the Knicks. Unfortunately, as of recording this, last night their 9-game win streak was snapped at the hands of Phoenix. Chris Paul just, went crazy. He had a vintage Chris Paul game. As of course, Phoenix is still chasing that number 1 seed out in the Western Conference. But we've been talking about the West in the last couple of episodes, so I wanted to come back a little east, a little bit here. The Knicks are 4 as of recording this. They're tied with the Atlanta Hawks right now, but of course the Hawks without Trae Young going forward for at least the next couple of weeks, it looks like. So you imagine they're going to hold them off there. But right now we're closer to the playoffs. We're under a month away from the playoffs. You've got the Knicks over a team like Boston, who of course had expectations, over a team like Miami, who is in the play-in game at this point, who obviously was in the finals last year. People expected to maybe see them make another run at this. I think it's early on. It was, the Knicks they're coached really well by Tibbs. Of course, to me, he's the coach of the year right now. It's either him or Quinn Snyder in Utah, maybe Monty Williams in Phoenix as well. But they're playing their best basketball of the season. Julius Randle on a different Barrett's breakout season continues, among other things. But this has really gone from this is cute. New York is going to make the playoffs. They're building great chemistry for the future. This is a good young team. Knicks fans finally have a team to be excited about. So I really wouldn't want to play them in the first round or maybe even the second round at this point. Like this team, this is the best Knicks team in years.
Yeah, and you know what? It makes things just a little bit more fun around the NBA and around NBA Twitter as well when you have Knicks fans that aren't just killing themselves night in, night out, watching the teams that they've been putting out on the floor over the last several years. It's a lot more fun to see the excited Knicks fans that we've seen here over the last 9 games in particular, leading into last night's contest with the Suns. But you mentioned Julius Randle. I mean, this is a guy that we have to be, for me, he's the most improved player, because I don't think coming into this season, I would have said, okay, 23, 10, 6 assists from Julius Randle in leading the Knicks into the 4th spot right now in the playoffs. As you mentioned, he has to be that guy. And what he's been able to do, I don't know that any of us saw this coming after his start here over the first, 4 or 5 years in the league. He's shown potential at times, but this has been just a different level of play from him. And I'm really impressed by what he's done, but also, as you mentioned, credit to Tibbs, because if there's one thing that guy can do, he can get a team to figure out how to play defense. And this Knicks team going into last night was 4th in the league in defensive rating. There were only 3 teams above them at that point heading into last night. And that's after a season last year in which they were in the bottom 3rd, I think 23rd in the league last year in defensive rating. So that's a massive leap forward, and not too many different pieces. There are a couple of different pieces here and there added to the team, obviously, but defensively, a lot of the pieces were already there. Tibbs is just figuring out how to make the best recipes with them.
Yeah, I mean, I liked a lot of their signings in the offseason, and it was kind of like, you get people on these nice 1-year type deals, guys who are going to play hard, they're going to prove it for you, and really try to earn that next contract. It was funny. I remember when they signed Austin Rivers. That was one of the players I was most excited for, and he hasn't even really been that big of a factor for the team this year. But, I mean, I look at a guy like Nerlens Noel, who they got for $5 million, a guy who really has been written off. I mean, he showed signs in Oklahoma City, but really post that Dallas contract and the way the exit was there, it feels like he's kind of been an afterthought. I mean, he was that type of player that you maybe take a flyer on and look at that. I mean, you want to talk about a guy earning himself a ton of money, but I mean, Julius Randle, I completely agree with what you said in the sense that he's the most improved player this year. I mean, there's a chance Julius Randle is the MIP and makes an all-NBA team. I mean, the numbers are there. The impact is there. And I mean, I just remember last year, it felt like Julius Randle sometimes would just become a black hole on offense. Like he's shown signs. He had moments in New Orleans where he was good, certainly in his Lakers tenure as well. But it just felt like he would kind of dribble into the paint and then just get stuck and kind of forget what to do. And I don't know. Julius Randle has elevated his game to just levels that absolutely incredible. Just the work that he's been able to do with this team, and I'm just super duper impressed all around. Like you said, with Tibbs, certainly knows how to coach defense, if nothing else. And this is a coach who, you essentially had guys. It feels like the book had been written on Tibbs. Put it that way. It like even when they signed him, we're like, is this a retread? I mean, I was a little critical of that. I almost felt them to be a little more creative with the coaching hire, but. You got to give Tibbs credit. Of course, the young guys are playing a ton of minutes a night. There's no doubt about that. But I mean, he's been consistent. He's been really good. And like we said, that defensive efficiency is why I don't want to play this team remotely in the playoffs.
No, and I think the other thing that you have to take into consideration when you're talking about this team going into the playoffs as well is just what they've done against those teams that you mentioned around them in the standings. If you're talking about Philly, Brooklyn, Milwaukee, Boston, and Atlanta, they're 6-8 against those teams at this point. Sure, under 500, but the point differential is 109.1 to 108.5 in favor of the Knicks. They're actually plus in the point differential, despite the fact that they have that losing record. And of the 8 losses, 4 have come by 1 possession, 6 have come by 7 or less. So they've been playing those teams tight. And those are the teams that you're going to end up seeing in either the first round, if it's Atlanta in the 4-5 matchup, or into the second round, if you're talking about the teams above them in whether it's a Brooklyn, a Philly, whoever the case may be for that top seed in the Eastern Conference. That's a scary matchup. We've already seen a couple of times what they've done against Philly this season and the kind of battles that they've had with them. And we've seen the same sort of thing in the crosstown rivalry with Brooklyn. And I got to tell you, I'm kind of rooting for that matchup simply because I want to see what New York is like when both of those teams are good at the same time, because we haven't had that. We really haven't had both of those teams be good, period, over the last, I don't know, 5 years that I've been here until this season, when we're seeing the best of both worlds. And I'm really excited to see that kind of matchup in a playoff atmosphere at the Garden, when we may start getting more and more fans back in the arena. That's going to be electric. And I'm really excited. I really want that to happen, and trying to speak that into existence, because I think that'd be a whole lot of fun.
Well, you know how it goes with living up there, in the sense that, I mean, the Nets stole all the momentum when you go out, obviously, and you sign a Kevin Durant, and you sign Kyrie Irving, and you trade for James Harden. Like, there's no question the Nets are the better basketball team right now. But the Knicks are king of the city. Like, there's no doubt about it. This is not a situation where, you know, with hockey, with the Islanders and Rangers, for example, there is a little bit of that geographical divide. Even with the Giants and the Jets, a little bit. There are those two fanhoods. With the Mets and the Yankees, it's kind of the same way. Look, the Knicks are always king. If the Knicks are good, they're going to be the number one basketball franchise in that city. It doesn't matter what Brooklyn does. Now, obviously, I think the ceiling is a lot higher for Brooklyn this year, and I don't think anyone in that organization is going to care if they come home with the Larry O'Brien trophy. But, I mean, that would be an absolutely electric first round. If the standings hold, we're on pace for it right now. Now, obviously, there's a lot to still be decided with that number one seed. As of recording this, Brooklyn is number one. They're a full game up on Philly. They're still 3.5 up on Milwaukee. You know, nobody below that is going to catch them. Even Milwaukee, it's a little bit of a tall task at this point, being that many games back. But, I mean, I'm looking at this. I mean, if Atlanta holds at 4 or 5, excuse me, and even Boston's there, I mean, it's tougher with me with Boston, obviously, giving the duo of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and then with Kemba Walker starting to round into form a little bit. Like, I'm hard-pressed not to trust their experience, but Boston has been inconsistent all season long, where, like, New York has been this the whole season. And I do think there's something in the way they play for each other. Like you said, the way they're going to defend come playoff time. I mean, you know, we talk about a potential Philly-Brooklyn matchup as this all-offense versus all-defense matchup. The Knicks are kind of like that with defense as well, and they're just going to make it a nightmare for anybody they play. There's not going to be any of these blowout type games. And it's just wild to me because, I mean, the Knicks have legitimately gone, in my opinion, from okay, we're here now, we're excited, this has rechanged the culture, this could potentially have massive long-term ramifications for us if we continue to be this stability, or just this stable organization in terms of recruiting stars and bringing players in. But there's a very good chance they come away with a playoff series win this year. And I mean, making it alone, and I think what they've done, this has already been the most successful season in probably since Melo, maybe in 2012, 2013. We want to go all the way back. But I mean, this is a tremendous victory and turnaround for the Knicks. And I mean, like you said, you just got to be impressed. But I mean, I really think they would probably be the favorite in any first round series they play. And that's a remarkable sentence when I thought they'd be more around Detroit and Minnesota this year and playing for Cade Cunningham.
Yeah, it really is wild, especially when you consider where they were prior to this 9-game winning streak, right? You're talking about a team that's 34 and 28 right now after last night. So going into last night's game, 34 and 27, they were under 500 prior to this win streak that we just got off watching. And I think that really kind of changed a lot of opinions on this team, because they were fighting hard throughout the course of this season, and they were playing that good defense, as you mentioned. And as we've talked about, because of the system that Tibbs has implemented and the way that he's able to coach those guys. But really seeing everything come together here over this last stretch of 9 games has been, I think, what's started to turn the opinion on this team just a little bit more. Obviously, anytime you put that string of wins together, you're going to be in that type of spot. But, you know, one of the other things that stood out to me too, Kevin, is the fact that we're talking about a team that since the All-Star break, they've been near the top of the NBA in 3-point shooting. They're averaging shooting just under 40% per game from beyond the arc. And I don't think we saw that coming with this particular team and how it's set up going into the season. Granted, they're not a volume shooting team in the way that you'll see some of the teams in the NBA. They're averaging about 29 attempts, but they're shooting really well from beyond the arc. And that's a dangerous combination when you also have that defensive side of the ball locked down the way they have as well.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about Julius Randle's three-point shooting last week. I mean, it's just outrageous. His clip, I mean, the attempts have gone up in recent years, but the clip he's making them at is just at a new level. I mean, RJ Barrett, part of his growth, like we
Yep.
said, it has been that consistency with the three-point shooting. I mean, even just, like going out and getting Derrick Rose has been a great addition for them. Alec Burks has been a guy who I thought was a sneaky great signing on, a one-year deal, played a lot of great minutes for the Sixers last year. And I mean, especially what they've done too. I mean, we talk about a little bit about the three-point shooting, but as well in the interior. I mean, you've had Mitchell Robinson, who's missed a whole bunch of time this year. I mean, besides Nerlens Noel, the fact that they've been able to just make this a workable rotation, there's nothing else that you could say. You got to be really, really impressed by everything they're doing. And again, this is with, the rookie, for example, Obi Toppin really isn't playing that much.
Yep.
Kevin Knox, a guy who they were a little high on a couple of years ago, really isn't a big factor in this. Frank Ntilikina is not really a huge factor in this rotation. I mean, it's just super impressive across the board. I mean, these young guys out of nowhere, the veteran signings, and then like we said, the continued growth of a guy like Emmanuel Quickley as well. They really have done a good job at getting the most out of everybody. And credit to Leon Rose and the front office with this group, bringing these guys in, building this culture. The Knicks finally have something to be excited about. And that's just a sentence that, we've had flashes with, but we really haven't said in a while. And, all they have to do is be stable, and they're going to be players in the NBA going forward. I mean, we saw LeBron tweet about it a couple of days ago where he said the league is better with the Knicks. Like, I always hate that type of exceptionalism because I want to, because that's the thing that that's our main grumble with the Lakers, I guess, is the Lakers exceptionalism is everybody across the board is that, they're this historic franchise who's always been good. They feel like they're almost entitled to that success. But you got to love having the Knicks back around. It's nice. I mean, it's been, I remember those mellow teams and the electricity they brought up in New York. Again, when you and I were at Hofstra, like I remember just the city with Linsanity and how much just energy was there. We're starting to see that energy back. I think no matter how this ends, this is a resounding success of the season for the Knicks. But I mean, the fact that we have them potentially winning a playoff series, it's just, again, hat tip to everybody involved. And, I think what else can you say about the season that they've had?
Yeah,
switching gears a little bit.
I was going to say one final point because I want to ask you a question because I actually was thinking about this myself a little bit earlier today, and the one question that there's obviously questions in terms of how they'll perform in the playoffs because we haven't seen that yet from this group. But the one question I have coming down the stretch is it seems clear that Derrick Rose is the better option at point guard for this team. Elfrid Payton last night really struggled once again, only 15 minutes, didn't really do much in those 15 minutes, and the per possession numbers for Rose are clearly better. Yeah. But can you rely on Rose at this point to play those heavy minutes that you're going to have from him in the playoffs in order to make that type of impact that he's been making thus far, coming in more as an off the bench, high minutes guy there?
Oh, and I mean, that's a valid question. I think he can do it off the bench. And I worry about those Elfrid Payton minutes, like you said. Sorry, Justin. I know you're cringing as you're hearing this. He's the last person on Elfrid Payton Island. I mean, he's given them a couple of minutes this year, but I mean, it's largely in spurts. I still don't think Elfrid Payton is really that great of an option, but I do like what Rose has done off the bench. I don't want him playing 40 minutes a night. I guess it's that way. Like we've seen how that's worked out for Tibbs in the playoffs before, and that's going to frustrate the hell out of Knicks fans because I know everybody is a little tired of Elfrid Payton at times. It certainly feels like Knicks Twitter has been quite vocal about that, but it's a concern. I like what I've seen recently, though, and given his relative health here over the past couple of years, I'm more encouraged about it than I have been in the past. Seeing it on Detroit last year, and I mean, even him making a bigger impact here in New York. I mean, look at the impact he's made this time versus his first Knicks tenure and how different it's been there. I have reasons to be encouraged. I think he knows his body a little bit more. But again, I mean, it's certainly a concern. I'm not going to just suddenly act like that Derrick Rose has never had these injuries in the past. But I do think that is an interesting concern the Knicks are going to have, and I think that those Elfrid Payton minutes are going to be clutch. They just need him to be serviceable. That's the thing. If you can get to those Rose minutes, you just need to tread water. I'm not asking Elfrid Payton to be out here like turn into playoff Rondo or something like that. But I need him to just tread water and get to the Derrick Rose minutes, and then you'll be fine. Because like you said, I don't want Rose goes in that starting lineup where he's averaging 40-plus minutes a game. I don't know that that's a long-term recipe for success. Now, switching gears a little bit, staying in the Eastern Conference, the other surging team, of course, is the Washington Wizards. They, I think we jinxed them a little bit. They lost as well. But 8-10, 8-2 in their last 10, I should say. This is a team that's been dead in the water, but now all of a sudden is in play-in game picture as of recording this. They're game up on Chicago in the 10th seed. Still 2.5 back of Indy, a little bit to go before they get up to Charlotte and Miami as well. But Russell Westbrook's been cooking recently. Obviously, he's bringing up his triple-double numbers over these past few. Just absolutely incredible over really this past 10-game stretch. I mean, he single-handedly, he and Bradley Beal have brought them back into the playoff. I mean, and it's what's more impressive to me, and we'll get into Russ's triple-double comments here in a little bit, but what's really impressive to me is, I mean, this is a team that probably lost its third best player really early in the year with Thomas Bryant going down with the ACL injury. No disrespect to Davis Bertans, but I mean, Thomas Bryant was expected to be the guy that's had a breakout injury. They were going nowhere fast. And all of a sudden, I mean, compare them to a team like Chicago, who goes out and trades for Nick Vucevic and has Zach LaVine in this all-star year and this young cast of characters who they're fading and going the wrong direction when it seems like they were pushing to go in. The Wizards have suddenly taken themselves out of lottery, contention and are up here, and they're going to be in the play-in game. I don't really know that they're going any further than that, but the fact that they're here and with those two players, the way Russ is playing right now, looking like vintage Russ a little bit more, it does give you a little bit more credibility with them than I would with otherwise, given that star power with him and Brad Beal.
Yeah, without question. I mean, those two guys, Beal and Westbrook, they're always going to be terrifying, particularly in a setup where you get into a play-in situation, because if those two erupt in those play-in games, then, well, we're talking about a bit of a different situation. We're not talking about a 7-game series over that point in time. We're talking about a couple of games where they have to just have their best nights, and they can certainly do that. They've proven that over the course of their careers. But people that are listening to this are going to think that I'm just entirely focused on the defensive end, but it's been the same case here with the Wizards. They were horrible to start the year. They were a disastrous team defensively, but since the start of February, they're up into the top 10 in the league in terms of defensive rating from that stretch forward. So when you're able to fix that side of the floor, a big difference in that has been the interior defense and the rim protection that they've gotten out of the trio: Alex Len, Robin Lopez, and also Daniel Gafford. Daniel Gafford has shown up and done a really nice job inside for them, and it's been extremely impressive to see them get themselves into this spot where now we're talking about them, as you mentioned, ahead of a team like Chicago, who went basically all in at the deadline to try and make it into those play-in games and say, okay, let's see what happens once we get there. Instead, we're talking about a Washington team that we had all left for dead very early in the season. And shouts out to them, because that's been just a really fun to watch stretch of basketball. And I don't know about you, but I always enjoy Russ. I mean, good, bad, ugly, any Russ is fun to me. So this stretch in particular has been a lot of fun to watch.
Well, and he's leading the league in clutch efficiency in the NBA this year. So that's been one of the big knocks right away, is that you don't want the ball in his hands late game. And, here we go. Again, I'll let Russ take a three. If that's the shot I give up, so be it. But if he's knocking down these shots, it's hard to argue with the results. To your point on the defensive end, the first game of that win streak was against Utah. They gave up 121 points. Besides that, the most they gave up in that win streak was 115 in that overtime win against New Orleans. I mean, besides that, we're talking about 111 against Sacramento, 107 against OKC. And again, these are a lot of bad teams they've beaten. So it is worth mentioning there. I mean, you beat the Thunder twice, you beat Detroit. But, you got to beat who's in front of you. Again, you beat Cleveland pretty convincingly the other night by 9 points, and their loss was on a back-to-back to San Antonio in overtime, where it still was a 3-point loss. I mean, obviously, that's the aberration there. They gave up 146 points to San Antonio. That's certainly a far cry from 110. But, I mean, again, I'm not about to really bash them for that one game. They've got a pretty favorable schedule coming up. I mean, they've got a game with the Lakers, who obviously have Anthony Davis back, but still no LeBron. You've got Cleveland, you've got Dallas, you've got Indy, you've got Milwaukee, Toronto, Indy again, 2 with Atlanta, Cleveland, and Charlotte to end the season. I mean, when you talk about Indy twice, you talk about Charlotte, you talk about Atlanta without Trae Young, those are games that if they're going to get into the play-in scenario, they need to win. And frankly, they could very well be in a position. I mean, that back-to-back with Atlanta on May 10th and May 12th, I think is going to
it's going to be crucial.
Atlanta and their seeding. But there's a chance where they get in here. Again, they just need to maintain pace over Chicago. Chicago doesn't really have, I mean, they pretty much have equally difficult schedules going forward. I don't think there's a big drift one way or the other there. But this is a team, like I said, Chicago went all in. I mean, there was no doubt about that. Washington, I think, is going to coast into this play-in game. Now, are they going to beat Charlotte potentially, especially if LaMelo Ball gets back? I don't know. And I, of course, wouldn't pick them against Miami, even though I love Brad Beal late games. I'm not suddenly about to just throw Miami to the wolves like that. But I mean, overall, I guess when I look at this team, because we talked about, I mean, all year early on, it was that they couldn't play defense. It was like them and Sacramento that were the worst teams in the league. And I feel like for the first third of the season, we were just like finding Bradley Beal trade destinations and how to get him out of here, and that the Wizards need to fully rebuild. Instead, I mean, of course, I still think they need to build around the young guys, and they've got a couple of good ones on this roster, some that you mentioned as well, that kind of complement this trio. Again, I don't really know what the long term is here because, of course, you're tied into that Westbrook contract for a while. But that Westbrook contract is only going to lose years, too, if you decide to move on. And if he's giving you this type of Russell Westbrook, it has a lot more appeal than it has in the past, certainly, especially in this past offseason. Now, Russell Westbrook the other night, of course, had those triple-double comments. He's had so many recently, of course, Mr. Modern Era King of the triple-double. And he mentioned how it's interesting how, people have kind of used that to knock his game a little bit where, he mentioned the 2 players he specifically mentioned were Magic Johnson and Oscar Robertson as guys who, were setting these triple-double records and are all-time NBA Hall of Famers. Of course, I think it goes without saying that Russell Westbrook is a first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't think anyone doubts that. Now, in terms of his comments, I guess I have a love-hate with it because, like you said, I love the Russell Westbrook experience, and I really do like what he's doing for this Washington team this year. I think he has them overachieving, and there's something to be said about that. I also think, I don't know if I really want to make the Magic Oscar Robertson comparison because they were winning. I mean, Magic Johnson was always in the mix with these Showtime Lakers. They were winning titles. Russell Westbrook, it's tough because he was that at one point. I mean, we flash back 5-6 years ago with Oklahoma City. They're a 3-1 lead away and a Klay Thompson barrage away from going to the finals with him and KD, and then going up against that Cavs team. Maybe the legacy looks a little bit different then. Of course, I think now it gets to a point where, and I think we saw it a little bit in Houston, where the efficiency maybe not what you want it to be. And later on in OKC, there maybe is a ceiling on it. Just like I think there's a ceiling on this Washington team. But I don't think somebody accidentally stumbles into all these triple doubles in the NBA. I'm hard pressed to say that these are totally empty calories either. And if I'm getting the clutch minute success that I've been wanting from him essentially the last few seasons, I'm pretty happy. No.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of always the problem we have in debates, not only just in basketball but around sports generally, right? It can only be black or white. There's no gray area because there's no fun in the gray area, right? Nobody's screaming at each other over the fact that, well, yeah, Russell Westbrook's really good and he has a ton of triple doubles. He's averaged a triple double over the course of the season multiple times now. But at the same time, could his efficiency be better? No one wants to hear that. Everybody wants to hear, well, no, it's all empty calories, or he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. There's not really that in between, but you're right. It is nuanced in that way. And I think that's kind of the way you have to look at Russ, especially at this point in his career, because he's not going to be the same just athletic marvel that he was when he was coming out of UCLA and just some of the explosiveness that he showed. He's not going to be that same guy, at least not all the time. He's going to show you some of it. He's going to continue to collect triple doubles. He's going to continue to put up these stats. And you just have to find those ways to enjoy it. Is it always going to be pretty? No. There's going to be nights where he's putting up shots that you're wondering why he's taking them or what he's thinking. But at the same time, this is a Washington team we're having fun with at the bottom of the Eastern Conference. How many teams, Kevin, over the past 5 years at the bottom of the East can you say were legitimately fun? Like,
no,
fun in this way. That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
you're looking at this team and you're just kind of like, okay, you know what? It's fun. Like, do I think they're going to win? No, but are they fun? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're rooting for young teams that play hard, essentially, at the bottom of the Eastern Conference at that point. It just almost depends on your definition of success. A couple of crazy stats about this, because it was 8 straight wins before, of course, they lost to the Spurs the other night. A couple of crazy things. That's the first time they've had a win streak that long since Michael Jordan was playing for the Wizards last.
Yep.
So it's been almost 2 decades. Pretty crazy to think about there, that it's been that long. We talked a little bit earlier about I think Tibbs is coach of the year, with a couple of others in contention. Scott Brooks is not going to win coach of the year. There's no doubt about it. I think that goes without saying. But this is a guy who I'm pretty sure was at the top of most likely to get fired list at one point.
Oh, yeah.
There were a lot of Washington fans who weren't exactly thrilled with Scott Brooks. They've had this win streak. They've gotten themselves back into playoff position. Like we said, they're missing Thomas Bryant, who most people thought was their third best player on the roster going into the season. And oh, by the way, they've had a ton of COVID issues. Like we haven't even talked about that over the past 2 or 3 weeks. There probably hasn't been an NBA team more recently who got hit as hard with COVID as they did, where you were just missing large portions of the roster. I don't know. I feel like, Scott Brooks to me has earned himself some time. I don't think Scott Brooks is the best coach in the league, put it that way. I don't think he's in that elite tier for some reason, but I don't really think Scott Brooks is the type of coach that Washington just gets rid of after this. Like, I think he's done a pretty commendable job, all things considered.
Yeah, I would agree. And I also think you have to look at it from the standpoint, you were mentioning this earlier with the Knicks, where you're at as a franchise, right? And where in the process you are. So understanding that is going to be key to what they do at the head coaching spot. If they're going to completely tear down and rebuild, and we're once again at the beginning of next season talking about, where's Bradley Beal going to be traded to, then that's maybe a little bit different and you go for somebody else as the head coach. But if you're talking about, okay, well, Beal and Westbrook showed during the course of this stretch that they can play really well together. They can work off of each other. We have Thomas Bryant coming back, as you mentioned. Maybe we can fill in some pieces around him, and we have something here that can get to those bottom couple of spots in the Eastern Conference, which are consistently churning and kind of up for grabs year in and year out. Maybe we can grab another playoff appearance next year. He's probably the guy that you want in that situation. So I would agree. I think he's done a really nice job steering the ship, and I think he's a guy that, if that's the way you want to go, and it seems clear that they want to be at least competitive, and I don't think you make that move to bring in Russell Westbrook and swap him for John Wall if you're not trying to make something different happen with the team. Then yeah, I think you bring him back and you try to continue to build on this, at least for the time being. And if something changes and you want to move that Westbrook contract, then okay, we have that discussion at a later date. But I definitely agree with you. I think he's bought himself at least some time.
Yeah, the years will definitely tick off a little bit, which will help. And glad Bradley Beal is healthy too. He mentioned getting kicked in the back of the leg, which of course brings up, Achilles worries for everyone, but everything checked out all there. So you do enough injuries this year. I don't think we really want to end another season like that. We need Bradley Beal healthy. Of course, that goes without saying for all the Washington fans. All right, looking at the top of the conference now. So we're going back. Really a rough week last week for the Sixers. Lost 4 straight. They did snap that against Oklahoma City the other night. But Brooklyn, even, with KD playing limited minutes, with James Harden, who looks like he's going to be out for the rest of the regular season, they're holding just barely onto this number 1 seed. Milwaukee's 3.5 back. They beat Philly twice last week. Now, granted, Philly in the second game was undermanned, but they just blew the doors off them completely. It was a tad bit concerning. I don't expect to win that game necessarily, but they really just got it handed to them. The first game too, Milwaukee was shooting absolutely lights out. We'll get back to them in a little bit. Brooklyn, though, they're holding this 1-game lead right now. Again, I think, the big talk with the conference, of course, has been trying to avoid 2 or 3 just because you don't have to play Milwaukee. Like, I do think Milwaukee is going to be that number 3 seed. And then whoever it is, whether it's Philly or whether it's Brooklyn, you'll end up having to play them in the second round. Like, as much and highly as we were talking about the Knicks, I still would rather play the Knicks than Milwaukee come playoff time. The Knicks don't have Giannis Antetokounmpo playing for them. And so, I guess to that point, because it's tough with, as we see Brooklyn resting players, and with Philly, if you don't have Joel Embiid completely healthy, if you don't have Tobias Harris completely healthy, who's been dealing with knee injuries, if you don't have Ben Simmons completely healthy, who's missed some time recently, he came back the other night. But the ceiling for this team goes down a lot faster than it does for a Brooklyn who can maybe make do with one player.
Yeah.
The Sixers, of course, have a super easy schedule the rest of the way. I think they have the easiest schedule in the NBA, so that should be able to do them a little bit.
Second easiest, well. But yeah, right in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So regardless, like they should be able to hopefully cruise, even if they have, a couple of Embiid games off. I know they're saying that they want to chase that number one. Embiid has said so as much. They want to play at home court. But going back to Brooklyn first, if Harden doesn't play the rest of the regular season, they're going to have barely played the three of them together this season. I've always maintained with three players that good, I don't really know how much it matters if you kind of get your gelling figured out in the first round, but that's going to be a hell of a second round gel series if they have to play Milwaukee. And even, I mean, it would be with New York too, but Milwaukee is Milwaukee. Like, I guess on a 1 to 10, how concerned are you about their complete lack of chemistry, especially so far?
I mean, there's definitely some concern there because, as you mentioned, these are three pieces that do well when the offense runs through them, and particularly are at their best and have their most shining moments in those situations. But at the same time, I think the one thing that is kind of factoring in here, and it may just be me reading into things a little bit, or being a little bit too reading into the psychological side of the game, but I feel like KD and Kyrie in particular, because they've been on teams where they weren't really the most talked about player, right? You're talking about for Kyrie, he was on those Cleveland teams with LeBron, and LeBron ends up getting both the credit and the blame for a lot of the situations that those teams end up in. KD with Golden State, he was the best player, but we were often talking about, is it his team or is it Steph's team? And he was in that awkward scenario where, you're clashing up against, this isn't really my team, I want my own team. Kyrie goes to Boston, Kevin Durant and him link up here in Brooklyn. And I think just maturity and age over time, you get less possessive of the ball, and you're able to work a little bit more with some of those teammates. And I think that's kind of where we're at with these guys. And I'm not worried about the chemistry between those two. Am I worried a little bit when all three are in the mix? Yeah. So maybe like a 3, but again, that talent factor that you mentioned really matters, because all three of these dudes are all world talents. And when you're dealing with that level of talent in the playoffs, it a lot of times is going to win you the games that matter. And that's kind of where I'm at with this team. So scale of 1 to 10, I don't know, probably about a 3 or a 4 on the concern level. I'm not above a 5, where we're starting to get into that maybe inching closer to the panic button range, but not concerned either.
No, well, the fact that they've missed these guys and still have continued to win these games too, I think speaks to their depth. Their depth is a lot better than people give them credit for, with Joe Harris, with Nick Claxton, with even guys like Alize Johnson and Bruce Brown off the bench, who have really played a lot of solid minutes for them this year. Their last win against Phoenix, and they're playing Toronto as they're recording this, but that win against Phoenix, when you just basically had KD unbubble wrapped for 20 minutes or so, and when Kyrie took over, like, that to me was the warning shot to everybody, where it's like, hey, I don't care how much we haven't played together. Phoenix, this is a team we talk about as maybe could win the Western Conference, as legitimately one of the best teams in the NBA this year. And Brooklyn came out and said, look, it doesn't matter whether we're fully healthy or not. We're here. We're going to win a meaningful game for standings, because that's the thing, is all these games are a little meaningful, with battling with Philly for number one. I think it means less to them than it does for Philly. But again, I think I'm trying to avoid Milwaukee if I can here. We'll get into Milwaukee again still in a little bit. But I mean, I'm right with you. I really don't think it matters. Like, I think any chemistry issues they'll figure out really quick. I mean, you have at the minimum 2 of the 5 best players in the NBA. I mean, KD, it's him and LeBron still 1-1.
Yeah, I think
by the way, we haven't even talked about Kyrie yet. Like, this offense maybe has the potential to be the best offense I've ever seen if it fully clicks and is healthy. And when the ceiling is just that high, now will they reach it? That's the next question is, against teams that maybe have a little more chemistry, like the Sixers, like the Bucks, like the Lakers or Clippers or Suns or Jazz or whoever ends up coming out of the West. But I don't know. Like, I know everyone flashes back to Miami when they had the big three and the little bit of gelling that it took for them. But, I have them more in the Golden State, kind of teams with KD, where if everybody's healthy, it may matter against the Lakers a little bit because I think the Lakers are that good too. Like, to me, they're still the favorite to win the whole thing. But I mean, Brooklyn's the clear favorite in the East, and that's coming from me. Like, I want to be wrong about this. Like, I want Philly to beat Brooklyn. You have no idea. You're in the same boat. But at the end of the day, like, it's hard for me to pick against these three guys. I just still think the offensive ceiling is for so high. Now, going back to the Sixers, they're, I guess, running down the list here. Of course, that's going to be the defensive offensive battle. They're basically banking that with Ben Simmons, with Matisse Thybulle, with Joel Embiid in the paint, that you're just going to suffocate the hell out of this team. You're going to be able to, stick a few of these guys on them the whole time. And then Embiid's going to be able to take advantage of because obviously I think it goes without saying the Sixers have the advantage there. Embiid is going to torch DeAndre Jordan. I like what Nick Claxton has done this year. Obviously, LaMarcus Aldridge is retired now, so he won't factor in at all to this rotation. But I'm just always going to pick offense over defense if it comes down to it. Like, defense can win you titles, but like, I just trust so much of them more to get a late bucket. Like, I've seen enough of the Sixers late game offense, and no disrespect to Tobias Harris, who's been really efficient in the fourth quarter this year. Of course, with guys like Danny Green, Seth Curry, you have shooters who can hit big shots, and even Joel's done it late games this year. I think he's been a lot better in the clutch, but I feel like the Sixers still need everything to go right to beat this team. I'm not really worried as much about the losses this past week, and I know everyone will look at the losses in Phoenix and again too with Milwaukee, where you're going to go, hey, these are good teams, you're not stacking up. Call me when they're fully healthy. Like, I guess that's my thing is that, if they had all three of those guys against Milwaukee and got blown out of the water, I'd be a little more concerned. I still think this team, especially the one seed, is crucial to them because for me, I think it's a trip to the conference finals. Like, I think they can handle whoever comes out of the playoff game, and I think they can handle New York as tough as New York has played them. Like, it may go 6 or 7. I think New York may surprise some teams, but the Sixers getting one for them is so much more crucial, I think, than it is for Brooklyn. The margin of error isn't there, but I mean, you got to give Daryl Morey credit. Like, he basically doubled down on the vibes in the current roster when he didn't make the move for Kyle Lowry, when you obviously don't get involved in a James Harden trade earlier this year. A part of me is excited because I think guys have stepped up off the bench recently. Furkan Korkmaz has been great. Yep. Of course, you got Maxey, who's a rookie with a lot of promise. Obviously, Matisse Thybulle. I mean, Matisse Thybulle might be the best player in the league if he had any sort of offense with how good he is on defense. I don't know. Like, I think this is maybe the best Sixers team that honestly you and I have seen in our lifetimes, arguably, even better than the 0-1 finals team. We'll see, maybe even better than the Jimmy Butler team a couple of years ago. But they got to get one. That's the biggest thing for me is I'm still, as much as I want to pick them over Brooklyn, I do think they can take Brooklyn to 7, but I'm just hard pressed to beat this Brooklyn team when they're all gelling. And I guess that's what it comes down to, as disappointing as that is to say.
Yeah, and to your point, I think getting the 1 seed is also important just from the standpoint of playing at home and having that home court advantage, because it's been clear this season, and it's been clear in past seasons as well, that the Sixers, they just play better at home. They have the 3rd best home record in the league right now. You're starting to get to a point where the Wells Fargo Center is going to be more filled with those Sixers fans, especially come playoff time as Philly continues to open up here as we continue to get further along into the summer. And I think that's going to be a crucial factor in this as well. You mentioned the fact that you're always going to take offense over defense when it comes down to late game situations, because you know that Brooklyn can go out and they have 3 different guys that can get a bucket at any point in time. And yeah, that continues to be the problem. We've been talking about this back and forth for a couple of years now, that those late game situations, outside of when Jimmy Butler was just like, okay, this is mine, these situations are mine, they haven't really had that guy. They've tried to go through Joel. He's had his moments in late game situations. Tobias Harris certainly has stepped up in that regard too, but I don't know that I see any of those guys on that team. And I'm like, you know what? You're going to be the go-to guy in those late moments, in the same way that we're talking about Kyrie, KD, or James Harden. It's not the same in that respect. So yeah, Brooklyn does have me worried in that respect. And that's why I do think you're looking at a Sixers team that the one seed's a little bit more important to them, and they do have an opportunity to go and grab it here with this upcoming stretch.
Yeah, Brooklyn's next couple are going to be really telling. So Brooklyn has Toronto. They're playing Toronto as we speak. They've got Indy. They've got Portland. Then they've got a back-to-back with Milwaukee. Both of those are in Milwaukee. So obviously that's a crucial stretch for them and for the Bucks as well. If they want to get back in this, they're going to probably have to sweep that if they want to make a run for one. But then you've got Dallas on the road. You've got Denver on the road. Chicago, San Antonio, Chicago, and Cleveland to end the season. Compare that to the Sixers schedule where you've got a back-to-back with Atlanta this week. You've got San Antonio, Chicago, Houston, New Orleans, Detroit, Indy, Miami, and then a back-to-back with Orlando and end the season. What, the hardest game they've got left is either Miami or San Antonio? I mean, I would have said Atlanta, given how well they were playing, but of course with Trae Young down, I think that goes down a little bit. I mean, there's no reason why the Sixers, in theory, couldn't win all of these games. I don't think they're going to, but they could very well win all these games, where, again, with Brooklyn, it's a one-game differential right now. That could go away very quickly against Milwaukee or even against a team like Dallas, who's going to be fighting to, stay out of this play-in game and get that 6 seed out west, try to stay ahead of Portland where they are right now. So I think that'll be telling. And then with Milwaukee, like we said, they're not fully out of this yet. I still think Milwaukee is probably going to be 3. It's just they have too many games to make up. I think they're going to run out of time. The best case scenario, obviously, there's a way where they can get 2 and then have the home court in that second round. I think that'd be massive. They've got Charlotte, who they're playing tonight, then Houston, Chicago, that back-to-back with Brooklyn, Washington, Houston, San Antonio, Orlando, Indy, Miami, and Chicago. So Milwaukee's kind of in the same boat. Like, to me, they have an easier schedule than Brooklyn does. Brooklyn has the hardest of these last 3. Again, 4.5 games is a lot to make up. I don't think they're going to do it, but this is a situation where if Brooklyn were to skid for some reason, there is a slight glimmer of opportunity for Milwaukee to get back in this and maybe have that home court in the second round series. Milwaukee is 5-5 in their last 10. Again, the really impressive back-to-back series sweep over Philly. I think you have to be thrilled with that. They did lose to Atlanta on Sunday, second game of back-to-back, a heartbreaker in overtime against Phoenix earlier this month. But a couple of good wins as well. They've been kind of basically alternating 3-game win streaks. It's been weird like that, other than their run in early March where they ripped off, I think, 7 straight. This is obviously a team where they went all in to get Drew Holiday this year. They've got PJ Tucker, who they made and got that acquisition at the trade deadline. Obviously, this is a team with title expectations who's flamed out in the past 2 years. A lot of that pressure goes away when you get Giannis to sign the max deal. So that is the one advantage that they have right now, is at least you don't have them looming. I mean, it would sound like a battlefield outside if Milwaukee took a second round exit this year. But I guess my question with you is, like, I don't know. It feels like all the national pundits at least already have Brooklyn and Philly penciled in for this conference final. I do think it's a little tough because somebody is going to have to play Milwaukee. And so Milwaukee will have to have the quote unquote upset. But if they play Philly in the second round, I guess is it really an upset if Milwaukee beats Philly? I feel like we're not giving them enough of a chance, really. I mean, I love Drew Holiday, obviously, defensively. He's the type of player that's built for the playoffs. They've got plenty of shooting. It feels like if they can get Giannis going, which is something they haven't done in the past 2 years, but if he can get going, I know he's going to have Ben Simmons on him and Joel Embiid potentially on him if they play Philly. But, I mean, against Brooklyn, he's going to have an opportunity to dominate that interior.
Yeah, you mentioned this to me as we were getting ready to record the show, and I think the thing that immediately came to mind with the Bucks is we've kind of put them in the same bucket as we did with the Los Angeles Dodgers for a couple of years there, back in the early 2010s. So I'm talking about the 2013 to 2016 range. They won 4 straight NL West titles, and then in the playoffs, flamed out, never made it to the World Series. And then eventually they make those couple of World Series appearances and obviously go on to win the whole thing last year. But we're in that kind of range where, okay, we've seen you do it in the regular season. We know what you can do. We know how good Giannis is during the course of the regular season, but there's just some fatigue with this team because, okay, the past 2 years now, when we've expected you to come out of the East and be that team that's fighting for the title, you've come up short. So I think that's kind of where they get lost in the conversation a little bit. And I do wonder how much of it is, to your point at the top of the show, just voter fatigue when it comes to Giannis. You have back-to-back years with MVPs. His numbers aren't that much different this year. He's not even being talked about really in the MVP conversation. It's Jokic, it's Embiid, it's LeBron. Again, you're not really talking about Giannis in that same way that you have previously. So I think there is some fatigue just around this team until they prove otherwise. And is that fair? No, probably not, considering they have made those additions you mentioned. Jrue Holiday, I love. I think it goes back to his time in Philadelphia when he was originally one of our guys, and I really enjoyed watching him. And then, of course, was part of starting the whole trust the process, and we went through the wilderness for a couple of years there. We don't need to rehash it, but I've always loved his game, and I've really loved what he's done, especially that playoff run that he had with the Pelicans there. And I think it was 2017, 2018. And he comes and is clearly an upgrade over Eric Bledsoe. And that's something that was missing for this team over the past couple of seasons. I think this is a different squad, and I don't want to see them in the second round, to your point. So that's another reason that it's important to get that 1 seed, because I don't want to see them in round 2.
No, I don't either. I feel like I said, that's a 7-game series to me minimum. And it's a push, honestly, but like, I want to just be out here and be beating the drum and just be, because, Philly and Milwaukee have had a couple snippy moments over the year. And I want to put the homer hat on and say we're going to beat the hell out of them. But I don't feel that way at all. I feel like, if anything, it's been really undervalued how good this team is. Jrue Holiday, like you said, he put Dame in prison that playoff series. It was one of the more impressive defensive efforts we're really going to see. He might be the most underrated player in the league. And again, I think come playoffs is when he's really going to shine. Milwaukee's depth has been really solid this year, again, with DiVincenzo and with Pat Connaughton and with Bobby Portis, who's been really solid for them as well. He's kind of found a great role there in Milwaukee. I still do believe in this team a little bit. I think Giannis has the pressure in the sense that, it's him and Paul George who are the ones where it's like, it doesn't matter how great you play in the regular season, for better or for worse, just based on history, you're going to have to prove it come playoff time. But I don't really want to see a motivated Milwaukee in the second round. And I think Brooklyn would be the favorite to beat them in a 7-game series. I'm kind of at a push with Philly. I think Philly, and it gets into the question then where, because this is something we've asked before on the pod, where relative to expectations, because if you're Milwaukee or you're Philly and you take a second round exit to either one of those respective teams and not to Brooklyn, is the season a failure? Is that it's tough. Like last year, Milwaukee was number 1. And so I think when they had Miami, who was, a 4 seed and who was more around 500 during the regular season, I can really sense the disappointment there. I think it would be devastating in Milwaukee, but I also don't know that that's as fair as it is in the past years, I guess. And this is a team that's been to the conference finals too. So I guess I don't want to downplay that as well. It feels like that got forgotten about, that they were against Boston a couple of years ago. So I don't know. This is a tough situation, but I think that we're not giving Milwaukee enough credit. I guess is the short version of my tangent, is that that was, again, I mentioned warning shots a little bit earlier with Brooklyn against Phoenix. I kind of feel like that was Milwaukee's warning shot. Again, Philly wasn't at full strength, but they are here. They are for real. And they probably, I've seen a lot of people kind of lump them in with Boston and with Miami and with all these teams who kind of should be there, but they haven't really been, given their body of work that we've seen so far this season. Milwaukee's been it. And again, I think it's just the fatigue and it's just the prove it mode, but I definitely think they could be. So let's assume, I guess let's make your predictions here. Because I do think Philly is going to be the number 1 seed given on this strength of schedule. I think they just are going to beat a lot of bad teams. I do think Philly will be 1 and kind of avoid the madness. So then I'll pencil them into the conference finals. I've got Brooklyn over Milwaukee. I will say that. I'm assuming you're in the same boat, but assume we get Brooklyn versus Milwaukee or we get Philly versus Milwaukee. How would you kind of call those series?
Yeah, I think you make a good point in terms of how the Milwaukee Philly series shakes out. I do have Brooklyn going through if that is the matchup. Now, I do think it would be interesting, and there are a lot of storylines there that are going to be a whole lot of fun. The matchups in particular, Jrue Holiday against Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, Giannis versus Giannis, and then the question becomes, do you have PJ Tucker on James Harden? How are you looking at James Harden if he's back for Brooklyn at that point in time? That's going to be interesting for me in that series. I do think Brooklyn wins it. When it comes to Philly, I don't know, man. I want to be the homer, and I want to say they're going to be able to pull off that second round matchup in a contested series like that. But I haven't really seen it yet from this team, and I think we've seen it maybe a little bit more from Milwaukee than we've seen from the Sixers in that respect. And I just it's such a tough one to call. That's why I really, as we said before, the Sixers need to grab that one spot because they need to try and avoid the entire mess that we're talking about right now. Because otherwise, you're looking at a situation where we know what the Philly radio market's like. Can you imagine, man, every weekend when I FaceTime my dad, he has something to say about the Sixers. And it's whether they're good, whether they're bad, whether Embiid just had a 38 and 14 night the prior night. It doesn't matter until they win something in that city. And if they bow out in the second round again, that entire market is going to be talking about what happened, what went wrong, how did we end up here? And we're going to be back to the same conversations we were having before.
No, I know, and it's nuts because the vibe is so different too. I mean, this is like last year at this time when we were going into the bubble. Like, I just wanted the Sixers season to be over.
Oh, I was not excited at all.
I was so miserable. Like, I couldn't wait for Boston to sweep us out of the playoffs. I could stop watching this basketball team. And credit to Daryl Morey. I mean, obviously, what a job he's done rebuilding this roster in a year to the point where we legitimately are chart. I mean, we asked if the Embiid Ben Simmons window was closed after last year. Now we're looking at a scenario where we're talking about them going to the conference finals and potentially further. But I do think Milwaukee is in that tier. And I think that it's the same boat for Phillies where people are going to lose their mind. And I'm going to hear bad takes on WIP and the Fanatic that are going to make me want to drink bleach. But it will be viewed as a failure for better or for worse. Like, I don't think it should be if they lose to Milwaukee necessarily in the second round, but I know it will be viewed as that, especially in a year where you got Embiid as basically as at least an MVP contention. Now, I think Nikola Jokic is firmly the MVP. I don't think there's much moving me from that position. Even as well as Embiid has played, I think it comes down to missed time. Their winning percentages are about the same at this point, so you can't even really do the dubs versus anything or this year. And I know Steph Curry is surging, but it sure feels like, despite what it feels like every big propaganda machine is trying to do, that Nikola Jokic is the clear MVP. But this is a special year with Joel Embiid. I mean, I think it goes without saying this is easily the best ball he's played of his career, and that you don't just these seasons don't come along very often. Like, you just don't want to waste that.
No, yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to what Ben Simmons said in his interview with GQ a couple of weeks back. I don't know if you saw that. It was with Tyler Ricky Tynes, and he was basically saying, this is the first time that I feel like this team genuinely believes this is our year and we can go out and win the title. There's been talk about it before. We've been around that conversation before, but this is the first year that we genuinely believe that we can be that team. And I think that's an interesting insight there into not only necessarily the past couple of years of Sixers teams, but also to how well they're playing right now and how well, to your point, Joel has been playing throughout the course of this season. I agree with you on Jokic and where he stacks up versus Embiid in that conversation, but we do have to appreciate this guy for what he is and what he's been able to do night in, night out this year. And if this is the type of season that you're having, you really want to cap it off in a nice way and get to the finals. But at the same time, if it does come down to a situation where we're talking about them losing in the second round in a let's just call it a 7-game series, because we assume that's what it's going to be, right? Against Milwaukee, it's going to be a tightly contested back and forth. They lose in 7 games. I don't think you can sit back and call that, well, that's a failure, when you clearly just saw a step forward from Joel. You saw Ben continue to make moves in the way that he has. Now, he hasn't developed the shot that everybody wants him to, but he's continued to take those step forwards and how he coalesces with this team as well. And you have bringing out the best in Tobias also. I think that you can still consider it a win, even if in the scenario you end up getting knocked out in a tight series like that against Milwaukee.
Well, in either of these teams, it'll be the age-old question, too, of chemistry versus not chemistry. We talk about Brooklyn's guys not playing together. Philly and Milwaukee, and even with the Knicks, if the Knicks are at 4, these are teams that have played together. They've made runs. They've built this chemistry all season. Again, will it matter against a team as talented as Brooklyn? I don't know. I don't think it will. I still think Brooklyn is the favorite to come out of the East, if not the favorite to win the whole thing. Still got the Lakers just slightly above, assuming everybody is healthy. But, it'll be that age-old test of chemistry and offense versus defense. But either way, this is a lot more of a three-team race than I think everybody is giving it credit for. So there is no doubt about that. It's going to be a fun playoffs. We're less than a month away. It's hard to believe it, but it is good to see the top of the Eastern Conference is legitimate as well. And that these teams really from 4 to 8 aren't quite as bad as they've been in the past.
Yeah.
I mean, even if Charlotte ends up being the 8, I don't think they're going to do anything, but there's a lot of good young players there. Charlotte's been one of the most fun teams to watch in the league this year. So, the long gone are the days of, I say that as they're probably hovering around the record. It just doesn't feel like, I don't know, I feel the way Orlando was as an 8 seed last year. I don't feel that about the 8 seeds this year. Charlotte, even if it's Miami down at 6 or 7, they're not it's not going to be a pushover in the first round. Of course, it's not the Western Conference. I don't think anybody would claim that, but the NBA is so talented right now. We know that it's the most talent the league has probably ever had. Ryan Mayer filling in for Justin Cousart here on the Driving Dish NBA podcast. Make sure you follow my man on Twitter at @R_Mayer, MAYER. Of course, host, producer for CBS Local Sports, doing some Fox News headlines, sports anchoring as well. Make sure you tune in if you're listening to Sirius. You got anything else you want to plug, bud? People don't know. We go back a long way. This is decades of friendship now. So this is fun. This is fun for me recording the podcast. I'm excited, obviously grateful that Ryan could come on and give his insights. But, this is just a super fun one for me as well. So thanks, Justin. I appreciate you going out and getting married. Ryan, appreciate it.
Congratulations, Justin. By the way, I took your spot for the week. I hope I kept it warm enough for you to come back and then completely kill me for the Elfrid Payton talk that we were having a little bit earlier.
Just don't keep it too warm. He might be sunburned after coming back from Cancun. So as long as his phone didn't end up in the ocean, then everything is going to be all right. Again, thank you guys, everybody, for listening to this episode of the Driving Dish NBA podcast. We appreciate you as always. Justin will be back next week. Stay tuned. We'll talk to you then.